Reflexive verbs in Spanish are used when the subject performs an action on itself, like saying, I wash myself, or she gets dressed. The key idea is that the subject is the object in a phrase, and in Spanish, such verbs are essential because they have to match the subject. While English can have the presence of multiple words, the verb's function is the same because the person doing the action is the same person receiving it. For instance, there is a big difference between dress and get dressed. To get dressed means to put on your clothes, as in getting dressed yourself, while to dress often implies formality or is used when helping someone else. This is the difference between regular verbs and reflexive ones. To conjugate reflexive verbs in Spanish, we have to see reflexive pronouns, which borrow the form of object pronouns. In essence, the subject is the object in a sentence, so the reflexive pronouns indicate that a subject acts on itself. Me, te, se, nos, os, se. The pronoun se is used for él, ella, usted, and ellos, so verb conjugations distinguish the subject. In general, reflexive verbs appear in the infinitive with se at the end, like lavarse, to wash oneself, levantarse, to get up, vestirse, to get dressed. You can even see the regular versions of the verbs, but to conjugate them, remove se, conjugate the verb normally, and add the reflexive pronouns before the verb, like in levantarse. Yo me levanto. Tú te levantas. Él se levanta. Nosotros nos levantamos. Because the reflexive pronouns specify the subject, we don't need to say the subject pronouns. Moreover, placing reflexive pronouns before a conjugated verb is the most common way, but it's also possible to attach them to infinitives and gerunds. Even though this placement is rare, it's still possible because their syntactical function works in the same way as object pronouns. When attaching them to infinitives, the pronoun goes to the end. Voy a ducharme. Quiero levantarme. When attaching them to gerunds, the pronoun also goes to the end, but an accent is needed on the gerund to keep the stress on the original syllable in the word. Está vistiéndose. Estoy duchándome. When speaking daily Spanish, it's a lot more common to put the pronouns before the verbs. When a pronoun goes to the end, the structure follows estar plus a gerund plus the reflexive pronoun, but typically you'll find pronouns before the verb, like me estoy duchando, me estoy bañando, se están preparando. Furthermore, not all reflexives are literal, because many of them are used for daily routines, like levantarse, to get up, acostarse, to go to bed, ducharse, to take a shower. An example is me levanto a las 7. Even so, some reflexives can have an emotional effect, like enojarse, to get angry, alegrarse, to become happy, preocuparse, to worry. An example is se preocupa mucho. At the same time, some verbs do not translate literally because they change meaning when they become reflexive, like ir, to go, irse, to leave or go out, comer, to eat, comerse, to eat up completely. An example is me voy temprano, I leave or go out early. Aside from these reflexives, Spanish also has reciprocal actions. When people do something to each other, we have to use reflexive pronouns, and usually the subjects are plural. Some examples are: nos hablamos, we speak to each other. Se abrazan, they hug each other. Nos vemos, we see each other. To clarify the subjects even more, we can add el uno al otro, or entre sí, like in se ayudan el uno al otro. They help each other, or one another. The last thing to note is that when using some reflexives with body parts, pronouns will be used with definite articles. In English, this concept uses possessive adjectives, like I brush my teeth. She washes her hands. I comb my hair. However, Spanish uses reflexive verbs with articles because the pronouns already tell us who the body belongs to. In a phrase like me cepillo los dientes, me already indicates myself, so saying mis dientes is redundant. This difference is important because Spanish emphasizes the person receiving the action with a pronoun and the body part with an article, if the action requires a body part. In other words, Spanish separates the idea of ownership from an object, whereas English puts them together. In conclusion, when looking at reflexive and non-reflexive verbs, we can see the change in meaning, and this is what makes the concept very important in the language. The key ideas are to identify who is affected by the action, memorize verbs with se, practice with daily routines, and pay attention to meaning changes. Overall, this is how reflexive verbs fully work in Spanish.